and they have very good budgeting process, planning process. But probably if you experiment in that company, you're taking a career risk. Because in large companies, one thing that you don't want to show is failure. But even in startups, to a certain extent, we don't like talking about that much about our failures. Whereas failure is the root of success. And success is the root of failure. So it's kind of funny. Just made this up right now. Oh my God. But so I think talking about what the selling point is, talking about the continuum between existing and new. And for the successful startups, it's a big challenge to disrupt themselves. Right? Think Dell. Dell had an amazingly successful business model, disruptive, and still makes a lot of cash. But where are they going to be in 5 years? They failed to disrupt themselves. Think Apple. I mean, coming back to Apple, we mentioned it maybe too much, but Apple has not failed to disrupt themselves again and again. Not just the product, but the product and the business model. So you want to do a combination of both. So we're supposed to take many questions, and I'm just blabbling on. Right? So blah, blah, blah is what I called it, right?
Yeah. Do you have any special adaptations for double-sided markets, as you mentioned earlier? Because,
yeah.
I mean, which one is your customer when you've got a double-sided market?
Yeah, so what I would, just get people to do is draw it up. And double-sided market is, in the book we call it a pattern, is not rocket science. If you draw it out, I mean, it's not easy to do. It's a different issue. But it's a customer segment here, a value proposition for that customer segment. It's a customer, so this would be a double-sided market, right? Here. Value proposition for that. And for both, you'll have a revenue stream. One might subsidize the other. If you take gaming, the Sony PlayStation 2. So I would suggest that you start just making it visual and tangible, because I remember we used to talk about multi-sided platforms and double-sided markets. It gives you a headache because there are huge economics behind it. Once you start drawing it out, it becomes very simple. And that was the principle behind our book. We saw the page as an interface, talking about UX. The more we made it visual, the more people who weren't usually traditionally interested in business, the more those people read it. Designers, right? You know how the design communities end up with this. Scientists. So I think trying to make this simple and straightforward in a visual fashion helps a lot to understand this. I don't know how long we have. Another 2 minutes?
My question was about looking at the model in a wider context. So in the book, you mentioned it very briefly. I don't know if you guys have seen this. And it's the model and canvas, but then around it there's other influences. I was wondering, since you published the book, have you come across any techniques that help you visualize that wider context?
Yeah. So we started something with Alan Smith, the designer of the book, so this is the business model, and one thing that came up is competition, right? People write emails sometimes say, 9 building blocks is fine, but there's the 10th one that's missing. The 10th one. And fine, right? There's no model is the right one. They say competition. But in fact, competition, I just see it as part of the business model design environment. Okay? The whole context in which you design a business model. And competition would be something here, but then you have needs and problems you're solving, you have technology change, you have macroeconomic issues, available capital. So here you make 9 decisions in our model, right? 9 decisions on who are you serving as a customer, what are you offering them. And you design that in a context, just like a product designer. Industrial design, right? Here we developed a set of cards, which we might put out on the market, that ask you questions to visualize the context. And again, I think the powerful thing is when you draw it out. You put you make a project room. You have 1, 2, 3, 5 canvases, and around that you draw the whole, context. different technological change, you visualize it by putting reports on the wall. Or here, talking about customer needs, you do the design research where you make photos of customers, or the lean startup interviews that you've done, you put them on a wall here. I think what we're generally lacking is customer would look more like this, right?
Can't see it.
Can't see it.
I can. Where do you visualize that? I think I'm emphasizing this a bit because I think we just don't make these things tangible enough, which leads to misunderstanding. It might be in the head of the person who interviewed. You want to make these things concrete. I think we're over time now.
We've got 2 more minutes, so one quick question. And then you'll have to run.
Come up.
Yeah. Right.
Hi, in your experience of working with businesses, big, small, whatever, a lot of the case studies that I see kind of lean and in your book are to do with companies who make products.
Right.
What about service providers? I'm in professional services, so
right.
Should I apply it differently? Do you see it as the same? How do you approach that?
I would apply it in exactly the same way. I think it's what you really want to apply as the principles and say, hey, look, this is the starting point, which might be a particular service, or it might be a particular market gap, a problem that nobody's solving, a job that a customer wants to get done, maybe, in private banking. It's not the super rich, it's not the super poor, it's somewhere in between, but I need a personalized service, right? You apply the same thing where you say, hey, this is the starting point. Let me come up with 4 or 5 different potential alternatives to that. Sometimes what you have in services, for example, is that it's not scalable because it's related to people. But that's exactly the challenge. You say, hey, this is the pain point. What could I do to make this scalable, to make it less dependent on people? Where it gets ultra complicated, here it is difficult, is when you're talking about one-person firms. I think it's not always that easy to come up with innovative models. It's a bit more effort. But it's doable. I mean, I changed my business model, from an academic to talking about business models. And anecdote, my son, I was in Finland with the whole family, I gave a talk, my 8-year-old son was in the audience. He comes to me after the talk and he says, Daddy, but what you just did, that's not working. Just the talk, right? So that's why I'm building a software company now.
Yeah, we've got to wrap up. So thanks, Alex. So, if you have an iPad, Alex has brought an extra 10 iPads. If you don't have one, but he'll be doing a session, an interactive session over the coffee break, which we've now just shortened. And the next session starts in like 3 or 4 minutes, so we can catch up by the end of the day.